Our next speaker is the partner and lead for digital transformation at KPMG Nigeria and Africa. He will be leading the conversation on leveraging ecosystems and platforms to accelerate growth. He is responsible for driving KPMG's digital and fintech agenda across the continent, and he is focused in helping to shape the digital agenda for various industries such as banks, consumer services, telecommunications, government, regulators, etc. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Boye Ademola.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, those of you that are here in Lagos, and to those that are in Nairobi, and those of you that are joining us on Zoom. And thank you for joining us. And Adrian, thank you for coming to Lagos. Would you help me appreciate Adrian again for his keynote address? Thank you, Adrian. All right, I'm just going to pick up from where Adrian left off and talk a bit about platforms. And, this is a topic Adrian himself touched on, leveraging platforms to accelerate growth. And in talking about platforms, I'm going to start by showing us this chart. All right, so this is a chart essentially showing and sort of buttressing the point that Adrian made. There's no shortage of capital. It's the returns that is the problem. It's where the growth is. So what you see in this particular chart, looking at ETFs, exchange-traded funds, which are like mutual funds, just traded on stock exchanges, is that if you put in $1,000 into platforms, in 2016, I think that's the date we have on the screen, over a 4-year period, the platforms outperformed other tech stocks, and certainly they outperformed other traditional companies by 2x and multiples of that. Essentially, we've seen that some of the biggest and most valuable companies in the world today are platform business models. Actually, about 6 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world are platform businesses. The big question really is, how does this value, what drives this value? Where is this value from? What's so different? And I think that's really what this slide shows. A big part of these organizations is that they are asset light. And I know many of you know this, all right? Many of them don't carry the traditional fixed assets, all assets that we have on the balance sheet. But the other thing I would like to stress about them is their focus on the network effect. And what is the network effect? Is this theory that is proven that platforms tend to reinforce each other. So for instance, customers will bring suppliers, and the suppliers, as they innovate and bring more products, will bring more customers. And what you'll find is that there's a compounding effect of what you call the network effect. The other side of the network effect is around the ecosystems, which I will talk about in a short while. The other thing we see about platforms that is really important to their valuation and how they grow is this whole concept of captive value. So captive value, if you look at platforms, is that sometimes it's difficult to even say what exactly is this business they're in. For instance, if I asked you, what business is Uber in? All right, you'll probably say to me, well, that's a logistics business, right? All right, but you see them venturing into different things. And they do that because of what we call the captive value that they are able to create. So once you get on the platform, they're able to focus on innovation and to bring new products that reinforces their impact on customers and continuing to grow that impact. The last one is around this concept on customer experience. And Adrian started to speak about that. And that is something that they are just relentless about. As we build platforms, it's so important that we are relentless about the customer. The way we look at the customer, we are always evolving it and making it better. So going quickly, is this also concept for platforms, just talking about that value and where it comes from is also from this concept around multi-dimensional value ecosystems. So you will see that platforms, they have ecosystems that are multi-dimensional. If I use Apple, there are different ecosystems that these guys have. If you use, for instance, Booking.com, different ecosystems, and they continue to evolve this ecosystem. But one thing that I think we often understate is also the concept, all right? The concept of the value chain and how platforms tend to reorganize the value chain. And that's something that I would like to dive into a bit more, because I know many of us here were corporates. Again, the value chain is something that we've, traditionally not paid as much attention to as platforms will pay attention to. And we're going to dive into that whole concept around ecosystems and value chain in a bit. So I'll come to this point around platform opportunities, and I will contextualize this for Africa. Adrian was talking about, the big or the huge opportunities we have in Africa. And I agree with him. And many of you will agree with me, there is a lot of work to be done. Every big problem that we have is potentially a huge opportunity that is waiting for an innovative solution. So for instance, let's get into it. We know that we have a really young population. We know that this Africa population were early adopters of tech. We've seen that in Nigeria, we've seen it in Kenya, we've seen it in South Africa. The other thing that we know is that internet penetration is growing in Africa. And what does this mean? It sets the context for us for what is coming next. But what I want to zoom in is really around this concept on sectors. As we think about platforms, and as you think about platforms, you want to look at certain sectors that may sort of jump out to you, rather than having a platform that is sector agnostic. If you look at certain sectors, we will be able to sort of dive deep and see the problems, have more clarity on the problems that we're trying to solve. And so, what I'm saying here is that if you take a few sectors, we're doing a lot of research in KPMG, and we can tell you some of the sectors with the biggest opportunities in Africa. But I'll tell you a few. Agriculture, for instance. Agriculture is a huge value chain. Remember, I spoke about value chain, huge ecosystem, and of course, it's very fragmented. Another one is around logistics that we know, especially when you look at logistics from a supply chain perspective. Think about the corporates in Africa. Think about, the warehouses. Think about trade in Africa and how everything is so fragmented. That's an opportunity waiting to be cracked. And I want to just dive into logistics as I share this whole insights around sectors and ecosystems. I want to talk about a startup that is doing something in logistics. And I think they are building momentum. And just to talk about the way that they have approached this, given the challenges we're seeing in logistics in Africa. So this is talking about Kobo 360. And how many of us, let me just say, you've heard of Kobo 360? How many of us? All right. So many of you have heard about this startup. So they focus on logistics. Some people will say, well, they are the Uber for trucks. But it's bigger than that. If you take a view of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, and what African governments are trying to do from a logistics perspective, if you take a view of the corporates and how we move goods around Africa today, and now we're looking at a borderless Africa where you can move your goods. If you look at the supply chain and the challenge that we're talking about, now that's a really big problem you're trying to solve. But in that problem, huge opportunities. And that's where Kobo 360 is playing and trying to make its mark. I want us to watch this video on Kobo 360, and then I'll come back and talk about the ecosystem that they're creating. right, so let me just talk about this. So when you take a view of what they're trying to do, it looks at first that they're just trying to move products, between locations. But obviously, there's a much bigger problem that Kobo 360 is trying to solve. Is that problem of that ecosystem and how logistics works in Africa. That's the first thing. The other thing that you see is that the more you look at this model and this problem and this opportunity, the more you realize that it is completely data rich. All right? Because, I remember sitting with the founder and he was showing me on his mobile app how trucks were moving around Africa on his mobile app. Imagine you can see how products are moving around on an app. You can see where goods are moving around. Obviously, if you have those kind of data, and this is back to the point Adrian was making, you can do a lot of predictive analytics. You can tell, all right, where the market is going to be. The trends will tell you, all right? If you take a look at the ecosystem, the other thing that jumps out at you is that there is a core and then there is a value-added part of this. The value-added, for instance, will be the drivers, deals with drivers and petroleum suppliers, because fuel is important to those drivers. For the drivers, with banks, with financing organizations, that's really important to the drivers, and so on and so forth. So when we think about these platforms, yes, the core problem, but also platforms, have that inherent ability to unlock captive value that you can then use to create value-added products. All right, so as I close, I want to leave you with, the way we look at this sort of things in KPMG, the way we look at platforms. And it's back to the connected enterprise. The whole strategy has to be connected. And I'm going to dive into it. We look at the front, the middle, and the back. I just want to keep it simple for you. I won't give you all our capabilities. I think Adrian has given you that. But think about this in terms of, what am I doing with the customers? That's the front. When you think about the mid-tier, is how am I orchestrating? And then when you think about the back, is the engine that is powering all this. So when you take a front view, the business model has to deliver a number of things for you. First, you have to add value to the ecosystem. That's extremely important. In this platform play, you can't be a taker. You have to first be a giver. Take, for instance, Google. And many of us here, when you left your house today, you probably put on Google Maps, but you don't pay for it. So we've got to, first of all, give before we take, all right? So in the platform strategy, how do I give, first of all? And of course, then you have to answer the question, how do I create value? And how do I capture this value? So what I show here are just 3 models, and there are a number of models for platform businesses. But these are just 3 models. First is the listing model, the listing fee model, where suppliers essentially pay a fee when they list on your platform. And then you have at the other end the subscription fee model, where people like us, consumers, like you do on Netflix, you pay a subscription. And right in the middle is the commission fee model, where for transactions, you pay. You have the Google's model, which is really around adverts, and you have other models. But, the key point is, how do I create value? How do I add value? How do I capture value? The other thing that is important about platforms is you've got to orchestrate within the ecosystem. And this is a journey many of you are on, all right? But it's really important. In very simple terms, you need to be able to deliver your products and your services via APIs. In other words, without a conversation with you in person, people should be able to see what you do, they should be able to test what you do, and they should be able to connect with what you do. Back to the connected enterprise. And then in closing, I'm going to show you this slide. Essentially, what this slide shows is that over the last 10 years, we have seen platform models create phenomenal value, all right, based on Web 2.0. Web 2.0, the World Wide Web as we know it, has created Meta, Google, Amazon, and all these great tech companies, Booking.com, Uber, and so on. They're all built on Web 2.0. But hey, hey, Web3 is coming. Disruption is coming. So what's the message on Web3? Web3 promises us a world where, very importantly, we can resolve the issues around identity, we can resolve the issues around trust, and perhaps most important for businesses, you can resolve the issues around trading anything that has value. In a Web3 world, anything that has value can be tokenized, and anything that can be tokenized can be traded, exchanged for value in very simple terms. So, what does this mean for your company? You remember I'm talking about the back now, the engine. There's a bit of an argument about should we then be going Web3. You know, my point of view is maybe you should be looking at a Web 2.5 over the next 3 years. What a Web 2.5 does is allow you the best of both worlds. A back end that may be powered by blockchain, which is Web 3, but a front end for your customers that you are able to consume those APIs, which is essentially is what we refer to as Web 2.5. Thank you. Web 2.5. All right. Thank you then.